to because I wanted to talk about some topics that can be perceived as difficult or problematic. Let me enumerate just some of them. What are the regrets that the Jews have towards the Poles, making it not possible to come back home after the war, the situation in 1968? The Poles and the Lithuanians, why have they changed their attitude towards us? We don't understand it because only historians mention the Żelegowski's riots or rebel. The Lithuanians lost their most important city. Poland is among the most conservative or homophobic societies as far as LGBT are concerned. We don't have civil law relationships or single-sex marriages, which are a standard in the majority of civilized countries of the world. We have ubiquitous homophobia, including in the language of the politicians who talk about it. We don't talk about the positive aspects of communism, of Poland in communism times, but there were some positive aspects next to a plethora of negative ones. The positive aspects includes the opportunity of promotion of different social classes, obligation to educate children, electrification and progress, as well as eliminating the dictatorship of the 5 or 7% of the population, namely the noblemen. I would like to discuss with you why these topics are perceived as uncomfortable for the politicians. Why aren't we able to talk about what is happening in the church? We are going to treat it in a black and white manner because of the pedophile problems. So I would like to start with discussing the LGBT, and Mirosława, over to you. Do you know why Poland is so intolerant? Why do only young people have more reasonable opinions that do not suffer from negative, bad emotions?
Myślę, że to, co pan redaktor o czym pan redaktor w wstępie wspomniał
I think that what you mentioned at the very beginning answers the question, because LGBT is an item in the basket of topics related to sexuality. It has nothing in common with what sexuality, the way sexuality functions and how diversified it is. And that's the reason why we don't talk about sexuality in Poland. The Catholic Church is an ally in making this topic a taboo. We also need to remember the role of the church in the in the history of Poland. We avoid discussing basic things. I don't mean here a far-fetched discussion on sexuality that, like the one that is happening in the Western countries, but about basic issues. The association of the independence march decided that the person who would go with them, who would be mentioned in the marches, was Maria Konopnicka. I was wondering whether these men, because they were mainly males, that Maria Konopnicka, apart from the iconic approach that we have to her, that she was a lesbian, that she lived half of her life with her female partner, and this is an attempt to do and hide the reality that we don't want to perceive Maria Konopnicka as she was, a woman living with a woman.
w pewnym sensie takim, no, że to jest po prostu zabawne. I dla tej polskiej młodzieży, która wychodzi na
For
ulicę,
young people
to jest to
in
dla nich
Poland
absurdalne i
who
zabawne, że po
go
prostu widać na
to
ulicach
the
facetów w
streets,
bardzo
it
rozśmieszonych
is paradoxical.
Rozbieżność w opiniach na temat osób LGBT.
There are different opinions on the LGBT group, especially the discrepancy is seen between elderly men and young women. Why are young women so progressive? Why are they so ready to rebuild or redefine the social awareness? Are they the victims of the system, of the intolerance, of the homophobia?
Myślę, że na to pytanie zdecydowanie lepiej odpowiedzą Państwo z Centrum Panelu.
I think that our guests from the Center for Research on Prejudice are better persons to give the response.
To, co socjologii się nazywa kryzysem męskości, jest
In sociology, we call it the crisis of masculinity,
ten gorset,
and I think that
związany z stereotypami,
the males
związanymi z rolą.
still wear this corset of obligations to fulfill their roles, and it's hard to reconcile it with the current reality. That is why the defense against the new reality and the new approach to sexuality is hard to bear. Some males find it difficult to adapt to this situation.
Paranoiczno, jakoś, nie wiem,
That is why they
śmieszny wręcz sposób próbują tej swojej
attempt
seksualności bronić.
to defend their sexuality and masculinity in a ridiculous way. For women, these norms, these standards are not so repressive. The same question goes to Michał Bilewicz.
A dlaczego właśnie starsi mężczyźni,
Why,
ze statystyk, które
according to statistics at least,
są najbardziej
the elderly males are least tolerant and most
najwięcej
homophobic.
z istnieniem czegoś takiego jak LGBT?
They are the ones who have problems about LGBT. This is one of the hypotheses that Mirka Makuchowska mentioned. It is confirmed by the data. Making people aware, we should make people aware that homosexuality is not infectious, but there is a big number of people who believe it, who believe so. Such an awareness is able to promote homophobia in elderly males. I think that the differences between males and females in Poland are deeper, and they do not only apply to elderly males but to the young ones as well. They are most visible in the youngest generation. Young males are conservative and authoritarian, ready to to vote for far right parties, while young women are not. It depends on the way we bring up boys and girls and what we communicate to the boys. What this nobleman and intelligentsia model includes. Girls or women are taught that it is moral to help others, to look after others, and not to fight for symbols. I would like to stop here because I think that in Poland these are the males who talk too much about the situation of females. So I think I should ask Paulina to take over. Yes, you're right. I assume that every person has some traces of femininity and masculinity, whether you're LGBT or heterosexual. We should not discriminate one another. But now I would like to ask Paulina Górska to elaborate on the same issue, but with an extra comment. During the last presidential campaign, we witnessed a terrible thing. One of the two major candidates called LGBT ideology, and he said that LGBT is the ideology worse than totalitarian rules such as fascism or communism. I don't want to evaluate or assess this because that's not what we should do. Before the election, he definitely revealed a different stance. He promised to help LGBT, but during the campaign, he withdrew this position. Perhaps his advisors decided that he would lose. Were the advisors right?
In my opinion, they were wrong. Referring to the differences between attitudes of women and men, Mirosława and Michał have started talking about this. There are different models of masculinity and femininity. Masculinity is based on two negations. You have to demonstrate two things to show that you are a man, according to the traditional moment. First of all, you need to show that you are not a woman, and secondly, you have to show that you are not a homosexual person. So, if the masculinity is threatened by, for instance, economic problems, then a way to regain masculinity is an attempt to control women in terms of their in their sexuality and reproductive aspect, or raising LGBT prejudices. It is an easy way to regain the feeling of safety in terms of identity that is being threatened, because civilizational changes are different. As regards the fact whether these advisors were right, I don't think they were right, because for quite a while the observers of Polish politics have noticed that politicians have become more conservative than their voters. It is specifically perceived among the voters of the Civic Coalition, in particular Civic Platform. We have developed a survey in 2018-2019. In 2018, so before the election to the European Parliament, when there was the issue of LGBT people rights started being used politically. So these attitudes have become worse. So we can see dehumanization of LGBT individuals. But something else has happened. the attitudes of the voters of the democratic opposition parties have improved. But they have become worse among Confederation and Law and Justice Party. So there was a movement towards better attitudes towards LGBT people, but there was this strong unwillingness of the government. So if our enemies are attacking us, we have to show that our relation to this attitudes to these people are better. So I don't know whether this is a permanent feature, whether these relations have improved or not, even if we look at the left-wing or right-wing parties, such as voters of the Social Left Alliance Party. Or when Law and Justice Party will lose the government, maybe we will go back to this previous level. We will have to keep observing. I really don't know how to answer this question. I would like to ask you, we are the society, we are citizens that try to be very elegant to women for quite not so long ago. It was traditional to kiss women's hands, but there are some issues such as, early retirement of women in comparison to men, and many men think that it is great, that it proves that women are respected in Poland, but the surveys indicate that women earn less money at the same positions, that managers are usually men, that it's very hard for women to be promoted. She has to be 10 times better than the man to assume the same post. So let's say early retirement for women. Is this an issue which stigmatizes women? Does it withdraw them from the labor market? Or maybe if somebody thinks that, well, this girl can become the president, she can run our company. Well, first of all, you have to acknowledge that first she will have to have children, she will have maternity leave, then she will have to retire earlier. So, in fact, such a candidate is excluded, despite the fact that she is the best in our company. And, well, it will be, this post will be given to men, although they have worse qualifications than she has. Well, this is an issue of sexism-based attitudes. So such attitudes can be subdivided into two types: the hostile sexism and the kind sexism. So there is this conviction, this belief that women could become authorities of men. So I think that this kind of attempt instrumentalizes sexuality. Women are using it to manage men, to rule men, and the kind sexism covers the belief that women are delicate, fragile, they have better taste than men, and that men should protect women. This really fits this distinction used in anthropology when we have horse and Madonnas. So this kind sexism is even more harmful to emancipation of women. The hostile sexism is easier to identify. If a man talks badly about women, it's easy to notice and it's easy to take some actions. But when some positive emotions are expressed in the form of the kind sexism, but at the same time, such people are convinced that women should be protected. In such cases, women find it more difficult to protest against such attitudes. It's hard to say, well, I don't want you to let me go first. I don't want you to kiss my hand because it makes me weaker. This has been indicated by studies, Julia Better's, Pareto studies, scientists from the UK and Germany. So women do not confront the kind sexism, but it contributes to the fact their ambitions are reduced. So one of the things we are not talking about is that some attitudes that are perceived as positive, such as this allowing women to go first, or kissing their hands, or carrying suitcases for them, well, such attitudes do not have to be so good in long-term perspective. Professor, now I would like to speak to Antoni Dudek. The train with historical materials has been waiting throughout the People's Republic of Poland, and now we can find out a lot about our past. The white places are disappearing, but some of them still remain the taboo. I wanted to speak about anti-Semitism and about Polish and Jewish relations. Recently, we have seen quite a lot of literature that talks about the share of Poles in Holocaust. However, this information is not really made public. Politicians do not like this subject, but we've got this belief that anti-Semitism is quite strong, and saying that Poles were guilty, that they were taking property of the Jewish neighbors, and that the scale of this phenomenon was greater than it has been expected. We are just afraid that it will hurt Poland. We do not want to hear such information. So why there is so much unwillingness to go deeper into these waters? Why don't Polish people want to speak publicly about this? Why do we leave it for scientists who are doing a great job? Because, well, this is their job. However, Holocaust and the fault of Poles during the Holocaust still remain the taboo. I have to say that I will not agree with you. I have a different opinion. You are saying taboo, you are calling it taboo. I call it a very vivid discussion. I don't like this discussion very much, especially when we talk about the Polish fault in terms of Holocaust. You were saying that politicians are avoiding this topic. I think it was a good approach 20 years ago, because when we read gross literature about Jedwabne crime, Leszek Miller said at the time that for every statement where Jedwabne is used, I am losing 1% of support. Every time I say Jedwabne, I lose 1% of support. So maybe that was like that, but for the past 20 years, there was a very vivid discussion, mainly led by historians who very often go beyond the historical workshop, and they become very engaged journalists. And I do not have this feeling that nothing is done in this topic. It's not a taboo. I think that in Poland we have seen a lot of publications, scientific and press publications, TV programs, movies. So there is a question. We can research the issue of the level of anti-Semitism in Poland, but I don't have this impression that after the 20 years there is a stronger anti-Semitism in Poland. I think it is weaker, but I'm not sure whether this level of weakening has been sufficient. I've been listening to the discussion with a great interest. I am not a conservative person. I was very curious following your discussion. It was very interesting because my mindset is a liberal and left mindset. So I was very interested to hear your contributions about the transformations. I partly agree with your diagnosis. The Catholic Church has played a significant role to stop these changes, and I'm very critical about this role of Catholic Church. But I would also like to say that blaming the Catholic Church only for all these problems is just like making it too easy. It's what is of the fundamental importance. It's the educational system and school. So we have to ask the following question. The liberals and conservatives have this naive picture. They think that once the law and party stops being in the government, everything will become normal. But we do know that the Polish school is really teachers. The teachers are the same. They are teaching in the same way. So there's a question whether we want to change the Polish school. If we want to change the Polish society, we need to start from schools, not at the level of the school curricula. I can imagine Sławomir Sierakowski replacing Przemysław Czarnek, who is now the Minister of Education. But the minister can't do a lot. And it's the teachers who are at the very bottom of the system are of key importance. So we have to ask ourselves what we can do to upgrade the standards held by the Polish teachers. I don't think we want to have them the same mindset. We just want to have Polish schools that will be teaching better. We want the school to learn students how to self-organize themselves, how to cooperate. These are the things that are in short that we don't have enough. So, Michał Bilewicz, what about this Polish anti-Semitism? Is it weakening? Is it the same? Is it stronger? If we consider the surveys that have been done for the last few years, the level of anti-Semitism in Poland is rather stable. It's quite surprising because it should be. It's strange if we see how it's escalating in the speech of the politicians. But even during the pandemic, during the time when there is the situation of increased emotions, the data do not indicate that any changes have occurred. The level remains more or less the same in terms of anti-Semitism. What is changing in Poland is the fact that people who are anti-Semitic, who think of different plots against Jews, now they are talking about this openly. They can write about it on Twitter, in Facebook. They can talk about it during Easter dinner. They speak about this with politicians. So what has happened? What has encouraged them? Who has encouraged them? Politicians? Well, I think it's the fault of the politicians and their language and the permission, authorization for the speech of hate. I agree with Professor Dudek. Maybe there are no major changes in the attitudes, but we can see that specific topics are released by the politicians. So, and it's also worth seeing what is happening at schools. I do not feel that teachers are independent in all their actions. Of course, they have to follow the school curricula. For example, if some teachers were trying to teach Arabic language, the ministry didn't like it. Well, it's hard really to say why is it so controversial to teach Arabic language, but Now we know that it was related to the threat of terrorism. So the school boards are taking some kind of steps, and and there are many teachers who teach about the local history of the Jewish community. So the best way to reduce anti-Semitism, to change the attitude, is not about starting new debates on Holocaust. Just as Professor Dudek said, both parties are trying to keep their decisions. What is important is to show that the Jewish people were the neighbors. The lady who was selling lemonade was Jewish, and all children visited her store. So maybe children can hear these stories from grandparents or great-grandfathers who in many cases are no longer with us. So it's the role of schools. Schools should disseminate this kind of knowledge. It's very important, and the teachers who decide to act this way, very often they face some problems because this is often treated by school boards as controversial issues. Well, so teachers are uneasy. They don't know whether the politicians will agree with this or not. If Minister Zalewska when she became the minister, she said initially that it was Germans who did the killing in Jedwabne. So it was a subtle message to the school boards, to the local governments, to schools, that they should control the contents disseminated by teachers. We are talking about topics that are not kept silent. I think that every politician, especially right-wing politicians, the first thing they are doing when they speak publicly, they are talking about the blames on Poles concerning the persecution of Jews. They are talking about threats caused by LGBT circles. So all these topics are overrepresented in the Polish politics. And it's probably convenient because using such topics, you do not have to speak about climate changes, because Polish government is doing nothing about such changes, or they do not have to talk about psychiatric hospitals. So there are very serious issues that are not good subjects for politicians. It's better to talk about such things as Poles, as victims being accused for anti-Semitism. So these topics are used to avoid some subjects. For example, when politicians want to avoid the subject of reforming universities, so on and so forth. So ideological wars sometimes are more convenient.
You mentioned that it cuts both ways, that we have heads and tails of these issues existing as the defense of the honor of the Polish nation, but we should also address something that was not our glory. Yeah, these are rejected topics. We talk about non-remembrance places. These places are intentionally suppressed. People know that this is the place where some people died here or were killed, but these areas are suppressed. Everybody thinks about it, but it should not be mentioned in an affirmative way. We keep on saying, don't think about polar bears, and consequently everybody thinks about polar bears. Okay, so just to defend the historians, I do agree with Professor Bilewicz that these topics are rejected locally or suppressed locally, but local elites feel like presenting an idyllic image of their local community. There is this mechanism of suppression. However, I wouldn't refer it to the historian circles. There are lots of controversies about the Polish Slovak or Polish Czech relationships. This is happening, but these are the topics that are niche. The Polish-Ukrainian issue has been more widespread. However, it also happened because of Wojciech Smarzowski's film. I know that we are running out of time, so that's my last comment. Ms. Górska rightly pointed out that the position of a white heterosexual male has become weakened. I do agree with that. Well, I'm not particularly happy about it, but the problem is that it does not only apply to heterosexual males, but to demographic changes in the European scale. The European citizens are getting older. When we compare the European community with the Asian or African ones, the discrepancies are obvious. Soon we'll have lots of incomers to Europe as a consequence. The question that arises is, are we capable of getting ready to it? Perhaps we'll come back to a multicultural society within the future decades, and it will either happen in a random way or in a prepared way. But if it's going to be in a prepared manner, certain measures have to be implemented, such as not letting it go that everybody who wants to come will come. In future, we'll have a conflict about it. The topic of refugees is another difficult one. We have the worst demographic perspectives in Europe. We're an aging society, and within the next 30 years, 800 million people will be born in Africa in the upcoming decades. Those people, educated or manipulated by the internet, will come to Europe to get the good life presented to them on the internet. I would like to turn to Ms. Makuchowska. We mentioned that we should not blame the church for everything, because this is only one source of developing our awareness. We have schools which are deep in the crisis, not able to generate a common vision of what our society should look like. We feel that healthy society is when everybody is Catholic, and when everybody is Pole, and we feel that the diversity is a hazard. But in the world, people understand that diversity makes the society richer. Another source from which we derive our knowledge about the world and which affects us is our media, apart from school, from education. But that's a wide topic of why we talk about celebrities and not about demography, the condition of Polish education. We do not do much about technological progress, and this is what is evident in the case of vaccine. We're waiting for the world to offer us something, despite the fact that we have excellent doctors, excellent scientists. We have no money and no organization to do it. There is also the role of the politicians who shape our perception of the world So what should change for us in order to change this attitude, to talk about these important issues that we have been hiding so far? I do agree with Michał. The point is not that we don't talk about them, but that we talk about them in a polarizing way. I think that the question you asked is extremely difficult to answer. Furthermore, there are some global trends that we have to mention. This is the information war related to excess quantity of information and a kind of ordering the world of information. Yeah, the information noise, but some of this information is externally controlled. There are some troll factories or states which affect various social phenomena, the way they are discussed, whether they lead to a social consensus or help to solve social problems, or quite to the contrary, aggravate them. This is one of the topics that poses a tremendous challenge. If we don't cope with that, the polarization is going to progress. Ms. Górska. I think that the prerequisite for serious discussion on these topics, on these issues, because we are talking about them in an emotional way, because both sides feel endangered. But all the actors participating in the discussion have to be equal. From this point of view, I like the fact that the position of white heterosexual male is getting weaker. We all have to be responsible for the time of colonialism. Perhaps this is the price we all have to pay. We have to accept immigrants from these parts of the world that were used by Europe. We were lucky not to be a colony, but we have Ukrainians and Belarusians whom we colonized, and they are already here. And this is perhaps our opportunity. If we have the vaccine for coronavirus, not because we create it, but because the peasants, the children of peasants from Anatolia left their home country and worked on the development of the vaccine. Perhaps this will save us. I represent the conservative minority. I am quite a peculiar conservatist because I am not against accepting people from other countries representing different cultures, different skin colors. This is inevitable from the demographic point of view. I think that the previous political elites lost sleep over it. The only point is whether this process is going to be random or well structured. To me, it makes a difference whether we have national minority of Ukrainians of 7 or 2 million, whether we are going to have Nigerian minority of 1 or 3 million. For me, it is important. We have to close our discussion in reference to Turkey and demography. In 1968, Poland and Turkey had the equal number of population, 28 million. Now Turkey has 80 million people and Poland 38. And we have 3.5 million of immigrants, refugees, and Turkey has a dozen or so a million. The processes that have been taking place since 1968 showed that we followed completely different directions. This can be food for thought why the Turkish peasants from Anatolia or their children and grandchildren are those who are going to save the world. Thank you very much for your contribution, for participating in a discussion. I would like to thank all of you who are following our discussion, and we're looking forward to seeing you again. Thank you very much.